Since literature is the expression of the people who create it, consume its content, and act upon its influence, a close examination of some of the texts of the American Revolution will reveal some insight into how and to what extent the literature contributed to the American Revolution. Some of the writers discussed in this vlog are James Otis, Thomas Paine, and Patrick Henry. Some colonists thought of themselves as British citizens and subjects of the King of England. James Otis of Boston, Massachusetts, thought otherwise. When King George III needed more money to help pay for his many foreign wars, he decided to start taxing the colonists. Since the people didn't like paying taxes, they began to smuggle goods that became contraband in the greedy king's eyes. Thus, while he sat in his English throne on the other side of the ocean, he allowed British customs representatives to board suspected American vessels in search of untaxed contraband. James Otis argued before the court that such a law violated the British Constitution, and although James did not succeed to persuade the King's Crooked Court to respect Americans' private property, his opposition to the King's writ of assistance paved the way for more compelling literature that surely inspired the Declaration of Independence and following war. In 1761, James Otis asserted the principles of private property. He said, "One of the most essential branches of English liberty is the freedom of one's house. A man's house is his castle, and whilst he is quiet, he is as well guarded as a prince in his castle." In 1775, Patrick Henry gave his famous "Give me liberty or give me death" speech, which inspired Americans in 1775 and continues to inspire Americans today. In his speech, he made himself clear that with the events of the times, any hope for reconciliation with Britain is non-existent. He proclaims, "In vain after these things may we indulge in the fond hope of peace and reconciliation. If all hope of peace and reconciliation is in vain, then independence is the only option." And he continues, "It is in vain, sir, to extenuate the matter. Gentlemen may cry, 'Peace, peace,' but there is no peace. The war is actually begun." Patrick Henry ends his speech with the most famous argument of freedom. "Is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death." Thomas Paine lived his younger life in England, but immigrated to America in the midst of the American Revolution. However, he had no reverence for the King of England, nor for monarchy of any form. Shortly before the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Paine wrote one of the most influential essays in favor of independence. In Paine's essay, Common Sense, Thoughts on the Present State of American Affairs, written shortly before the Declaration of Independence, Paine expressed his feelings toward the King of England and the prospect of remaining subjects of the King or establishing a new nation based on Republican principles. Paine asserts, "Hither have they not fled from the tender embraces of the mother, but from the cruelty of the monster. And it is so far true of England that the same tyranny which drove the first immigrants from home pursues their descendants still." Thus, Paine's rhetoric describing England as a cruel monster whose tyranny drove the first immigrants to the new land was surely intended to awaken the passions of the colonists and inspire the revolutionary cause. Paine's rhetoric continues to assert the failed relationship with Britain. Your future connection with Britain, whom you can neither love nor honor, will be forced and unnatural, and being formed only on the plan of present convenience, will in a little time fall into a relapse more wretched than the first. Shortly after Patrick Henry's speech and Thomas Paine's publication of Common Sense, Thomas Jefferson and the founding fathers of America signed the Declaration of Independence. In this declaration, Thomas Paine asserted, "The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over the states." Not only did literature contribute to the American Revolution, but the American Revolution also contributed to literature. Whereas the questions in the minds of the thinkers of the American Revolution lingered mostly on whether America was going to become a new nation or remain within the yoke of Britain. The success of the American Revolution and its separation produced other questions that needed to be debated. Who will we be as a new political identity? Thus, the success of the American Revolution inspired the debate between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. According to Alexander Hamilton, the power of the new government should not be much different than the absolute power of the king. He asserts, "Every power vested in the government is in its natural sovereign and includes by force of them a right to employ all the means requisite to the attainment of the ends of such power." Thomas Jefferson, an anti-federalist, thought of America in a completely different way. Unlike Alexander Hamilton, who wanted the federal government to be as tyrannical as the kings of the Old World, Thomas Jefferson, who drafted the Declaration of Independence, supported the anti-federalist position, which feared that the Constitution gave too much power to the federal government, thus erasing the cause of the Revolution. Thomas Jefferson asserted, "I hold that a little rebellion now and then is a good thing, and as necessary in the political world as storms in the physical." James Madison was a Federalist, but had some different views. Like so many of the founding fathers, he too was suspicious of too much power. He wrote, "Wherever the real power in a government lies, there is the danger of oppression. In our governments, the real power lies in the majority of the community, and the invasion of private rights is chiefly to be apprehended, not from the acts of government contrary to the sense of its constitutes, but from acts in which the government is the mere instrument of the major number of the constituents." After examining the literature of the Revolutionary period and the founding of the United States of America, it is easy to see that both literature had an influence on the fight for independence and the forming of America had an influence on literature.